All right. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining our virtual field trip today. I'm Lily Haynes, and I have been with the organization for about 6 years. I'll be hosting today's virtual field trip to these fish passage projects. I'd like to welcome everybody who's joining us, and to get us all in the same virtual room. If you can really quick, just pull out your chat on the bottom of your Zoom and tell us who you are and where you're from in that chat box. We will be joined today by a host of panelists who have been involved in the Cottonwood-Baggs Fish Passage Project. And so they will be with us after we take a little video field trip to the project. You'll be able to interact with them using that chat dialog box. Awesome, I see people in here. So we'll be joined today by Will McDowell, the Restoration Director at the Clark Fork Coalition, Caleb Ulring with the Fish, Wildlife and Parks Montana, Brian Barkowiak, who's a project manager for the Natural Resource Damage Program, and Josh Schreckengos with the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. But to get us started, we would like to take you to the Upper Clark Fork to a fish passage project that was recently completed on Cottonwood-Baggs Creek. To introduce that field visit, I'd like to have Will McDowell. If Will, you want to start your video. Welcome, okay. Will. Good to see you. So I see we have panelists here from the CFC. We have some CFWEP people. Good to see you guys. Thanks for logging on, everybody. Will McDowell is the Restoration Director at the Clark Fork Coalition, and he also provides technical assistance on irrigation and stream restoration projects for the Watershed Restoration Coalition in the Upper Clark Fork. He has a background in biology and watershed hydrology. Will, while I pull this visit to Baggs Creek up on my screen, would you like to introduce the video, kind of the area, tell people where we're working and what they're going to see?
Sure. Thank you, Lily. Appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for attending that's there. We started working at the WRC on this project about 7 years ago. Sometimes projects take a long time to develop. And so we were extremely happy last fall to be able to bring all the pieces together, from engineering to funders and of course the key landowner, and build the project last fall, and started up this spring. And we wanted to take people out on a field trip, and then the COVID crisis came, so we can't do regular field trips anymore. So we decided to do a video. So this video is about the project.
That is a critical element in this process, is building that confidence and that trust with the agricultural community that some of these innovative solutions for conservation are actually compatible with their operation, and vice versa. I'm Will McDowell of the Clark Fork Coalition, and I work with the Watershed Restoration Coalition here in Deer Lodge as well. The Watershed Restoration Coalition completed last year a big project at Cottonwood-Baggs Creek, an irrigation improvement project that has a lot of benefits for the irrigator and for fish passage. This is a really significant project in the Cottonwood watershed, but it doesn't solve all the problems in the Cottonwood watershed.
My name is Caleb Ulring. I'm the fisheries management biologist for the Upper Clark Fork for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. We came out to do an assessment of diversion in a ditch system to evaluate entrainment of West Slope cutthroat trout. The bread and butter to West Slope cutthroat trout fishery is the spawning tributaries, the spawning and rearing tributaries. Without good connectivity, good cold clean water, and the ability for those fish to to have the right habitats to spawn and rear and then out migrate back to the river, you know, you just won't have a cutthroat trout fishery. The big one is they've got to physically be able to get from the river to where they need to go to spawn. So it's got to have connectivity, and then getting them past irrigation structures and other barriers is super important.
What NRCS often does is find the way that we can get common ground between trying to improve natural resources like water quality, like wildlife habitat, like soil health, and making that make sense for individual landowners so that it is complementing their operation, which farms and ranches are a business, it's their livelihood, and also making sure that the taxpayers of the United States, which fund NRCS and fund the Farm Bill, where a lot of our money for these projects comes from, making sure that those taxpayers are getting something in return also, in the form of wildlife habitat, water quality, and productive ecosystems.
My name's Dan McQuarrie. Lived here all my life. Born and raised here. Been on this place for 55 years. We put a fish screen in to eliminate the fish going down the ditch. I think at one time they had, what, 400 fish in 400 yards of ditch. We just wanted to eliminate the fish going down the ditch and dying. So the reason we chose that fish screen is because there's no moving parts, it requires no electricity, and it requires no maintenance. The only thing it requires is a little cleaning with a brush once in a while. It's delivering all the water that I need for irrigation. I didn't believe that screen would deliver that much water, but it's delivering what it said it would deliver.
Okay, he's got his full water right coming in off of Cottonwood Creek and coming down that canal. Once that water gets here into the concrete structure, it flows over the screen. 90% of the water flows down through the screen and out this canal this direction. 10% of the water comes across the screen, then it flows down to a pipe, and the pipe takes the debris and any fish that came over back down to the creek.
One of the things that we need to get in perspective here is that a big project like the Cottonwood-Baggs irrigation improvement is one step on the road of really bringing back and restoring a fishery like native fish in the Cottonwood Creek watershed.
The Natural Resource Damage Program came through with the biggest share of funding for this project because it really meets the goals of their aquatic restoration plan for the Upper Clark Fork. It's bringing back a native fishery, and it's facilitating that upstream and downstream migration of fish that will bring the fishery back in the river.
This is one part of a bigger strategy that needs to be put in place, and this is something that the WRC is working on with the Natural Resource Damage Program and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. What is that bigger strategy? What are the next priorities? What are the next steps, the next projects that need to be funded? And we need to build the confidence in the agricultural community that these kind of projects can work.
All right. Thanks, Will, for that video. Those are some great shots of the project in there. Now we'll bring our panelists up on screen. So panelists, if you can start your video.
We're all here but you, Lily. Well, I can start to introduce some of the things about Watershed Restoration Coalition and Clark Fork Coalition. There you are. We lost you.
Go ahead, Will, and keep going.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Will McDowell again from the Clark Fork Coalition, and I work quite a bit with the Watershed Restoration Coalition as a technical resource, and worked on this project, as we said, for 7 years. There's some really cool aspects to this project. The irrigator was very willing to be innovative, and we're really grateful to the McQuarrie family and McQuarrie Ranches for trying this stuff out. The project includes a very innovative fish screen, the corrugated water screen, which is a new invention. Great West Engineering helped put the engineering on that together. And this is actually the second large corrugated water screen that's ever been installed in the United States. It was invented in Colorado just a few years ago. It's been used on a small scale. But this is a large 30 CFS screen, and we hope it will be the pilot for a lot of other good water fish screens that can be built in Western Montana. So I'm not going to say too much more. We're happy to answer questions and explain how the screen works, if that's something of interest to the audience, or other aspects of the project. But it does have fish passage benefits for both upstream passage on Baggs Creek and on Cottonwood Creek, and it stops the entrainment of fish into that whole large irrigation system on McQuarrie Ranches. So we considered it quite a successful project so far.
Awesome. So let's maybe take a second to talk a little bit more about the fishery in the Upper Clark Fork that we're looking at. And Caleb, I'm wondering if you want to unmute yourself and talk about the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks perspective, and why this was a good project for you guys to be involved in, and how you kind of informed it with what you know about fish entrainment in the area, and what benefits you see are coming out of it.
Sure. So Fish, Wildlife, and Parks involvement in these projects is sort of essentially we started out by collecting data across the Upper Clark Fork watershed to prioritize different tributaries for restoration projects. And then once we had priority tributaries identified, we started kind of further collecting data and using the data we already had to identify specific projects. So we worked with NGOs like the WRC, Trout Unlimited, other folks to come up with potential projects, and then prioritize them based on the data that we had and the issues that we know are occurring in these different watersheds. And then after the projects, we're generally doing the monitoring on the fishery to see how it responds to these different restoration actions that we're taking. I guess specifically on the Upper Clark Fork watershed and the fishery there, in the main stem, it's primarily a brown trout fishery, but we do have a component of the fishery in the main stem that's native West Slope cutthroat trout, and the state has an objective to increase that fishery. Currently, the West Slope cutthroat trout fishery makes up maybe 2 to 3% of the fishery, and our objective is to get that closer to 10% of the fishery. And you know, if water conditions improve enough and restoration is successful, even beyond that 10%. But right now, that's sort of the goal. And with this project specifically, the Cottonwood Creek watershed is like a lot of the watersheds in the Deer Lodge Valley. It faces a lot of the same issues that other watersheds in the issue face, from a fisheries perspective as well as an agricultural perspective. The Cottonwood Creek watershed is a little bit unique in that it has one of the handful of West Slope cutthroat trout fisheries, and so that's a little bit unique to this system. But as far as the issues it faces, it's a lot of the same as our other fisheries in the watershed. it's a fishery or a system that both the ag community rely on heavily for irrigation, and also the fishery relies on for production of West Slope cutthroat trout. And the ag community kind of has their part of it figured out. They know how to get their water. They've been doing it for a long time. The fish have, to some degree, learned to navigate the infrastructure, the agricultural infrastructure and the drainage, but they sort of need some help doing it. And so we've tried to use projects like this to partner with the ag community to meet some of their needs and continue to get them their benefits from the watershed, but also help the fish navigate the irrigation infrastructure and agricultural infrastructure in the drainages. And so I guess I think about this project and the Cottonwood Creek watershed sort of in the life of a trout. And so, you know, these adult cutthroat trout are living in the main stem river. You know, they live there until they're of spawning age, and then they migrate up these tributaries to spawn. And on their upstream migration, which happens in the spring, kind of at the peak of the runoff, they're navigating all of these obstacles. Some irrigation diversions are nothing for a cutthroat trout to navigate past. Some are a little more tricky for them. And so on the Cottonwood Creek, in the Cottonwood Creek watershed, there's more than a dozen of these irrigation diversions that they're likely having to navigate to get to the spawning habitat. And so right there, you're kind of taking some of the population out of the spawning population because they just can't navigate that infrastructure. And then once they do get to the spawning habitat, they're spawning. These fish are hatching in July. And then the adults need to migrate back down to the river. And so they again have to go by all of this agricultural infrastructure. And at basically every diversion, they have an opportunity to take a wrong turn and go down a ditch, at which point they become entrained. And some of them might be able to get back to moving water, but a lot of them are gonna die after they're entrained. And then as the juveniles come out in July, they rear in the stream, but they key in on generally high water events and a few other things to out-migrate down to the main stem river. And they sort of face that same challenge as the adults do. At every one of these irrigation diversions, they come across an opportunity to take a wrong turn and become entrained. And so kind of at each one of these steps, you're filtering out some of the individuals that could be successful in getting down to the river. And so by the time this whole cycle completes itself, not a lot of individuals make it to the Clark Fork River and survive to adulthood where they can restart the cycle. And so when you look at a project like this, it's in a key location. It's addressing an upstream passage issue as well as a downstream entrainment issue for fish. And it's also meeting the needs of the agricultural user. So Dan talked in the video about how he's still able to get his water. He hasn't had to change his operation a whole lot. He's got a little bit of maintenance on the screen, but generally been a really good outcome for all of the agencies that were involved, the fishery, and then also the agricultural user.
So a couple of things in there. I love that part in the video, Caleb, where Dan says he didn't think it was going to work. That's one of my favorite quotes in the video. A couple of things that maybe happened by fast in that I wanted to touch on. So you talked about prioritizing this Cottonwood-Baggs system for the native West Slope cutthroat trout that are there. And if you missed it, there's two parts to this project that you guys put in. There's the fish screen that we saw the great visuals of, but there's another part to it on Baggs Creek. And can you talk a little bit about that upstream migration part that you guys put in this project? I'm gonna have you turn your video back on. You're not done yet.
It says the host has stopped my video. Okay,
Oh.
I think I've got it now. Okay.
Yeah.
So the upstream passage. So we have, at some diversions, we have an upstream passage issue getting by the physical diversion, but also at this site on Baggs Creek and Cottonwood Creek, confluence is sort of right in the project area. And there was a partial barrier to upstream fish migration into Baggs Creek that was also addressed as part of this project. And so when the video was showing kind of the shot above the creek and you were looking down at a series of cascades there, that was taking a really steep section of stream that's likely a partial barrier to upstream migrating fish and stretching that elevation gain out over a distance to try to allow fish to get past that point and up into the watershed. And we had a telemetry tagged cutthroat trout make that trip before, so we know that they're using that tributary to spawn in. And so, you know, if the fish can't get upstream to the spawning grounds, that's sort of the biggest barrier. And, you know, we can't even start the process if we can't get the fish to the location to spawn. And so kind of getting them there is the first step. And this project addressed upstream migration in a couple different aspects, not only at a diversion, but also at the issue that was on Baggs Creek.
Yeah, awesome, thanks. And then there was that great shot when we first meet you in the video of, you know, the fish in the bucket shot or the fish in the hand shot. And do you want to tell us a little bit more about just what you guys were finding with those irrigation diversions and fish entrainment? I think those numbers are pretty incredible to know.
Sure. Yeah, so we've gone out on a lot of irrigation diversions and ditch systems on Cottonwood Creek and electrofish looking for entrainment. And so what we're trying to evaluate is, you know, how many fish relatively is a ditch in training, is a ditch system in training, and then what species are they, and if we can, potentially the timing when these fish are being entrained in there, or when the ditch system is entraining fish. And so you know, we can look at them and know that they're probably entraining fish, but depending on the orientation of the diversion, what type of diversion it is, how much water it's taking, all of these different variables, they generally are taking different numbers of fish. So I guess what I'm saying is some diversions are a bigger obstacle for fish than others. And so we are trying to look at that and determine which ones are a high priority to work on. And then also the location that they fall in the watershed can make them a higher or lower priority. For instance, you know, if there's a diversion lower down in a watershed and during out migrating times, a large portion of the water is going down that ditch, it can be a large issue for fish to navigate on their way down to the river. So that is something that we would electrofish, see if it's got a lot of fish in there. And then if it does, it would likely be a high priority to try to work on. And then that's where somebody like Will comes in to try to work with the landowner, come up with a solution that the landowner is happy with and that can also work for fish, and then try to get that project implemented.
Yeah, so after we identify, we kind of prioritize these from the fisheries perspective, we bring in the other partners into the project, and they come in and help get it done. So I think that thanks, Caleb, for that. And maybe Josh, we'll have you unmute yourself and pop you up on screen to talk about the NRCS and what you guys are looking at when you look at a project like this, and how you get involved.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'm Josh Reckengoss, the District Conservationist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service in Deer Lodge, Montana. If you're not familiar with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, we're a division of the United States Department of Agriculture. And a big part of what we do is administering the conservation programs that are part of the Farm Bill. These are all voluntary conservation efforts working with farmers and ranchers to help improve their operations for resource concerns that everybody in our country really benefits from soil productivity, soil erosion, clean water, clean air, healthy ecosystems in general, while providing food and fiber for the nation. So when we come across a project like the Cottonwood-Baggs Creek project that we're talking about today, one of the things that we're looking for is a way to implement these programs that we have on a voluntary basis with farmers and ranchers that provides benefit to the resource and still fits into their business model for providing food for the country and an income for their family. This particular project is part of a program called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, RCPP, which there's many acronyms in all of this, and I'll do my best to explain each one as I come to it. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program has been around for a couple of farm bills now. And the idea behind it is that a sponsoring entity, in this case, the Watershed Restoration Coalition of the Upper Clark Fork, applied for the Regional Conservation Partnership Program for funding for the Upper Clark Fork watershed, for irrigation improvements, for drought resiliency, for improving wildlife and fisheries habitat. So they put together this package of projects, basically in a conceptual form, and applied for funding through NRCS, through the Farm Bill. It was awarded, and this is kind of one of the crowning achievement projects of that particular funding source. One of the really great things about the RCPP program, and it's definitely well represented here, is the partnership. And of course, that's part of the name of the program. And that's really what's important. It's a group of different non-government organizations, nonprofits, and government organizations coming together, leveraging our funds to do something that we all see as a priority for making sure that our resources are well protected and well utilized. And really, this is a great example of that. So the RCPP funds were a portion of this. We provided some technical oversight, but largely the actual design and the technical aspects of the project were handled by the partners, which I think the other representatives on the panel can probably speak to that some too. But the major funding vehicles here were the Regional Conservation Partnership Program and then the Natural Resources Damage Program, which I won't go into the details of that right now, but very proud to be a part of this project and happy that NRCS could participate.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. That's a good overview of how you guys work with the project. And we can go on. Brian, if you're ready to talk a little bit about the Natural Resource Damage Program and your involvement in the program, I think that would be great. Just a reminder to the attendees out there, if you do have a question specific or in general about the project, you can enter that in the chat and I will help feed that into the right panelist, the person who might have the answer for it. So yeah, Brian is in Helena with us right now, right? Yes. And I'll let you kind of introduce your role at the NRDP and then talk about the project. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, thanks. I'm Brian Barkoyak with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'm one of the project people. So the mission of the Natural Resource Damage Program is to restore, rehabilitate, or replace or acquire the equivalent of injured natural resources. In the case of the Upper Clark Fork, it was obviously injured resources from historic mining in the area. Josh kind of touched on this, but this is a great project from NRD's perspective. First, it's the ideal cooperative working relationship between the Natural Resource Damage Program and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. More than that, from my perspective, this is a great project because the Natural Resource Damage Program did very little of the work on this one. This was all led by the Watershed Restoration Coalition and Will. But the good part of this project is it does address all the goals of the Upper Clark Fork Basin fishery, which are restore the main stem fishery by improving recruitment from the tributaries, replace lost trout angling in the main stem by improving trout populations in the tributaries, and maintain and improve native trout populations by preserving rare and diverse gene pools. So again, just to kind of recap, this is a great example of a cooperative project between multiple government, non-government agencies and landowners, and was really quite ideal because it did meet the goals of our program. So I'd like to again, I know I've said it multiple times, but I'd like to thank Will and the WRC for this program, along with the landowner, Dan.
Awesome, thanks, Brian. And I think that maybe the WRC deserves a little bit more of an explanation and a shout out. I know we were gonna be joined by some of those board members who had family circumstances come up, but Will, you are fairly familiar with them, along with being the Restoration Director at the Clark Fork Coalition. You've worked with the WRC a lot. Do you want to jump on and just give everybody, you know, we kind of went from a priority, from a fisheries view to the WRC, who went to kind of seek a solution, seek funding to solve that problem. Do you want to talk a little bit more about their work?
Sure, thanks, Lily. And unfortunately, Ted Dodge, the Executive Director of Watershed Restoration Coalition, who had planned to be on this call, wasn't able to be here this morning. He is a very enthusiastic and effective supporter of these types of projects. And in fact, the WRC has been around for more than 20 years. They were founded by landowners, primarily by ranchers in the Upper Clark Fork, to try to effectively put together projects that would conserve natural resources while sustaining the agricultural economy of the Upper Clark Fork Valley. They have done dozens and dozens and dozens of projects up and down the valley, from all the way from the Flint Creek Valley all the way upstream into the Butte area. There are board members on the WRC who are also board members of 2 conservation districts, the Deer Lodge Valley Conservation District and the Mile High Conservation District. So the districts were very fundamental players in helping found the WRC over 20 years ago. In this activity that we're talking about today, as Josh said, the WRC teamed up with Trout Unlimited and the Clark Fork Coalition to write an RCPP application, and that has a big impact because over $1.5 million were then secured from the NRCS to do projects in the Deer Lodge Valley. And the NRDP participated in the development of that proposal by agreeing to be a match source of funding. So that's why the match on this project came together, I think, quite smoothly, because it was already foreseen by the WRC as they developed the RCPP project 5 years ago, that Cottonwood Creek was a priority in the RCPP proposal, and NRDP had offered very substantial match to make that proposal an effective proposal, because it had to go through a national competition. So that is one of the great things about working in the Upper Clark Fork, is that the NRDP has state funding, which is a very good match for federal funding on projects like this.
I'm just curious, Will, the WRC wrote the joint application for this funding, and where are you guys in the process of then using that money? What other type of projects have been done, and where is the end? What does completion look like in this Upper Clark Fork?
Well, I'll say a few words, and Josh is the best one to respond to the specifics of the RCPP, because he's responsible for managing and tracking how that funding is spent. But sure, I think we're in the 4th year, so it's starting to wind up. The startup was a little bit slow, but we've been gaining momentum. There have been quite a few projects done in the uplands that are drought resiliency projects in various places from up in the Browns Gulch, Silverbow Creek watershed, all the way downstream into this area in Cottonwood Creek and the east side of the Deer Lodge Valley. And there are a number of other projects in the works right now, which would in fact complete, if those projects can be done, they would use the entirety of the funding that was provided, which was, as I said, over $1.5 million. So I don't know if Josh has anything more to add of how that's going.
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that just a little bit more. Very likely this year, and we're in the process of it as we speak, of implementing all of the remaining funds in that RCPP allotment of Farm Bill dollars. We've got several projects where we are going to be converting flood irrigation to sprinkler pivot irrigation that results in a more efficient water delivery system, which there's not a change in water rights in any way, but essentially a farmer or rancher has to divert less water to irrigate his crops, which results in more water remaining in stream and those in stream flows. We've got several more fish screens similar to the one that we saw on Dan McQuarrie's property that are in the works and plan to be implemented within the next couple of years. And a number of more upland projects, which range everything from forest management to off-site livestock watering facilities to keep water as clean as possible and to improve animal health so that they're not trudging around in surface waters. So probably the last year of obligating those funds is 2020, and we'll be wrapping up this project and be able to call it a success and look back fondly on it.
That's not a lot of time to spend $1.5 million. That's impressive. What so if you are, to our attendees who are out there, this is a great time to pop on with your comments, with your questions specific about the fish screen, about the Baggs Cottonwood project. Can I just ask, Will, you might be the best person to answer this, about the cost of this project specific, and a little bit about the fish screen that you guys used. I know it's a unique design. It might not be what you see in other places as a fish screen.
Yeah, the overall project at Baggs and Cottonwood had actually 5 different elements that were quite costly: new head gate, new canal alignment, fish screen, the upstream rock weir, I call it the fish ladder system that Caleb talked about for upstream passage. And we had to build a span to take the canal over top of Baggs Creek so the Baggs Creek could flow freely. And the overall cost was in the neighborhood of $320,000 for the entire project. But if you understand that there were those 5 elements, the fish screen itself, which is a very large fish screen, as I said, over 30 CFS, was probably in the neighborhood of $75,000 to $80,000 for the complete screen. We purchased the steel components prefabricated, and then the concrete work was done on site, of course, and then the steel screens were fit in place on site. And if people are interested, I have some pictures of that, but I will wait for my cue
to throw those up. Well, yeah, if you have an interest, if you want to see kind of the diagram of the engineering of that specific fish screen, it is a really unique, a really cool design. Also, for people out there, the video that played is something that we're going to make available, so you can get a better look at it by visiting the Clark Fork Coalition's YouTube channel, and we have that video of the project put up there for you guys to see as well. I don't see any questions coming in right now. So do we have any other thoughts from the panelists about the project? We do have attendees who are logging in from Northern Rockies Engineering, the NRCS and Deer Lodge is here too, a couple engineering groups, some conservation districts, even as far as Ennis out there. So do you guys have any other kind of key, maybe we can talk a little bit about the challenges of the program. We talked a lot about how it's a big success, but maybe a little bit about some of the hurdles that you guys faced in getting this done and how it still came out successful. Does anybody want to move in on that?
Well, I'm actually going to put it back on Will and see if he can talk a little bit about what design changes he would do differently for next time, and what were some of the construction constraints in building this, and mainly for some of the engineering firms on the call.
Awesome. And we also did, Will, maybe to kick that out, you can answer. We did get a question of who makes the fish screen. So like, what is it? Who makes it? What is it called? And then, yeah, some of the things you might do differently next time.
Yeah, thanks. As I said, this type of screen is called a corrugated water screen. It was invented by an engineer named Brent Mefford in Colorado after completing his 35-year career working for the Bureau of Reclamation on fish screens. So he's one of the top fish screen experts in the country. And he is marketing this screen now, and he put the first large one in place in Green River, Utah in April of 2019. So that was very recent. Jed Whiteley and I from the Clark Fork Coalition went down and visited the screen that was installed in Green River, Utah, only 2 weeks after it was put in to see how it was functioning. That was an 80 CFS screen, and looked at some of their design features. We were already well into the final design up here. So when we built this one, I would say that the concrete contractors did complain some about the difficulty of building the concrete foundation the way it was designed, especially on the downstream end of the system, where it was very tight and lots of corners and angles that were hard to form and pour. What we found in operating the system this spring, we actually had some pretty big hiccups at the beginning of the screen operation this spring. I did have a fairly upsetting Saturday night phone call from the irrigator the first day that he tried to irrigate. There were some things that needed to be adjusted, not so much on the screen, but because he had a new canal and a new diversion, all of the pieces weren't functioning perfectly well together yet, but that was fixed within a day or so. What we did find is that this screen, with a heavy load of organic matter being washed down in high water, whether that be Doug fir needles, roots, pieces of plants, we did get organic matter and sticking to the screen. And we did find that we did have to brush the screen to keep the efficiency of the screen up. Otherwise, as organic matter accumulated on the screen, it cuts down on the amount of water getting through, and the irrigator was not happy about having any loss of water to his canal. So we did quite a bit of tweaking to try to adjust the function, and they're small tweaks, but they were useful and effective. And we also found we needed a fail-safe system so that if there was something that happened that plugged the screen in the middle of the night, that the water would overflow naturally from the screen and back into the canal. That was something that we hadn't really previewed and was not in the design, but we had to modify this spring to make sure that no accidents that happened when no one was around would cause a complete loss of water to the canal system.
Well, I think with this conversation about like the mechanics of the fish screen and how it functions, I think it would be great if you did pull up those images that you have that kind of give the overview and show some of the construction of the different components. Do you want to share your screen with us all?
Sure, I'll try.
And I will say that you might have had an upsetting phone call on Saturday night, but Dan did not seem upset with brushing off the screen. If you've ever done irrigation work, brushing off a screen is like minimal maintenance work, right? To moving tarps. moving pipe.
Right.
Yep,
Okay.
you got it. Well, we can see you if you do that. And
Okay, is that good enough?
yeah, why don't you go ahead and share it? Click on that, the one up on the top that you had, the present, where you were yesterday.
Yeah.
Go ahead and click on that. It makes it a
There you
lot
go.
bigger and easier to see. That's
Yeah,
perfect.
okay. So this is a map of the project site outside of Deer Lodge, for those of you who are familiar with the area. This is the overall plan view of what we did. The Cottonwood Creek is in blue here. I'm pointing with my finger. I don't think that's helping. This is Cottonwood Creek flowing down past the Baggs Creek confluence here. So the new canal alignment is in yellow, and the fish screen is at this orange arrow here, where that was placed. The canal crosses Baggs Creek here, so this feature here is the 16 rock weirs that had to be put in to lower Baggs Creek so that it passed under the canal and was not captured by the canal. But as far as the fish screen goes, this is what it looks like when someone's brushing it. That's actually an NRDP intern that was brushing it. The important thing to see here, can't find my arrow. Oh, there it is. So you see the water is coming from the inlet side over here across the screen. Most of the water is going through the screen and underneath it. This is the water that's overflow, and that goes down into this black hole here behind where Morgaine is working, and goes into a pipe, an 18-inch pipe where this blue arrow is buried, a buried 18-inch pipe. And that takes any debris that comes across the screen and any fish that come across the screen and pipes them very quickly like a water slide, zip, right back to Cottonwood Creek. So that's how that functions. But how does it really work? A lot of people have asked this question. Can you see the young man in the red on the right-hand side?
Mm-hmm.
So the water in the canal, this is during construction, but it shows you how it's put together. The water comes in from where we are looking towards him, towards the young guy in the red. And as it builds up to the level of the top of the screen, it flows over the screen, and then it flows, where's my arrow keeps getting lost. It flows over the screen here. As the water goes over the screen, 90% flows through, and this is where the man in yellow is standing. That is the canal structure. So that is where the water is captured and then conveyed out and away from us towards that heavy equipment in the background, which is where the canal is. Actually, the guy in yellow is Brent. That's the inventor of the screen. And then, as I said, the water that overflows, or any fish or debris that overflow, that water goes down behind this gentleman in the brown, who's the general contractor, and into that pipe. Another feature to notice for the engineers is the high wall here was initially designed around the entire screen on all four sides at this high elevation. And then at the very last minute in the field, we notched it to bring it down lower. Actually, we did that so that cleaning the screen, as you saw here, would be easier, because if the wall was really high, she wouldn't be able to reach over and clean the screen. But what we found is, fortuitously, we found that if the screen plugs up and overflows, we now built a natural weir to take any excess water that might build up here in an emergency situation out of the screen. And so it doesn't overflow chaotically in all directions. It overflows under control in that direction. So that was a feature that we kind of put in at the last minute.
Awesome, thanks. Those are cool. Good to see.
So do I need to stop sharing?
Yeah, I think you can stop sharing unless anybody out there has any questions specifically about those diagrams, what you were looking at that Will was showing. If there are other questions out there, thanks Ian for that one. We appreciate it. Go ahead and enter them into the chat so that we can get those answered right now during this time. We are just about coming to the end of our hour of our field trip. We don't want anybody to stay out here too long, get sunburned, get dehydrated on our virtual field trip. So I think I'd like to give you guys, as the partners in the program, a chance for any last thoughts, any last messages to put out there. And maybe we'll start, Caleb, if you want to give a little Fish, Wildlife, and Park, anything last that you think people should know about the project?
Yeah, I guess I would just say I think it was a good project for fish. Has several aspects that are going to be beneficial to migrating and spawning fish, and is also, I think, a good project for the agricultural community. And also, I think we've talked about it, but it was a good learning experience. And as we talked about, it's a newer design, and we're looking at using these similar screens in varying sizes kind of all around the Upper Clark Fork watershed. And so there's a couple other small ones in Montana, and then this larger one. And so every one we do is sort of adding to that knowledge base that we have about these screens and how they work, what the benefits are of them, what sort of scenario is ideal for them. And so I think it's been really good for that, and kind of a good opportunity to showcase where these can be used and how they're beneficial. I think it's important to realize this is a small step in that larger picture of how fish from the river and fish within Cottonwood Creek need to be able to navigate around the watershed. And so this was a good project to sort of check off the list, but there's still a handful of projects that need to be completed in order to sort of tie it all together and really help Cottonwood Creek realize a fuller potential for fish production for the Clark Fork River.
Awesome, such a good point. A small step to a big goal, right? Brian, do you have anything else that you want to kind of close with?
Just like to, again, thank the landowner and the project partners, and echo what Caleb said, is this is just the first project of many in the Cottonwood watershed and tributaries to the Upper Clark Fork River. And thank you for putting this on. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you to any last minute NRCS things that you'd like to share. And I will say that after these guys have had their goodbye to everybody who's attending, I will share my screen, and you'll be able to see contact information for all of these guys, all of these project partners, as well as the organizations that they work for. Those will be linked on the last screen, and you'll also see a link to the video in case you want to revisit it. So if you have more specific questions for Caleb or Brian or Josh, I'll give you their contact info at the end.
Yeah, thank you everyone that took the time to participate today. And again, thank you to Dan McQuarrie and his family. Without the landowner being willing to try to implement a pretty innovative structure, we wouldn't be here talking. So it's really an admirable thing to do as a producer, and you can't thank them enough. If you're interested in trying a project like this and trying to get some Farm Bill dollars in your local area or on a specific project, there's an NRCS office in every county in Montana, and the best place to start is at your local office level. If anybody out there is interested in seeing the screen that we talked about today firsthand, the landowner is pretty generous in letting people come out and take a look at it. You could probably get a hold of any one of us, and we could set something up and stay as safe as we can and socially distance and still get it accomplished. So just thank you again, and it's been a pleasure working with everyone here.
Thanks, Josh. Will, do you want to sign out?
Yes, I will. And I have one more promo for the WRC and Clark Fork Coalition, who have been collaborating for 11 years now. This is actually the 6th conservation project that the WRC and Clark Fork Coalition have collaborated on in the Cottonwood Creek drainage. So we've been actually implementing projects, including projects with NRCS and NRDP funding since 2010 in the Cottonwood Creek watershed. So we are already trying to build those pieces of the puzzles so that the watershed can perform all of its functions as Caleb outlined, both for agriculture and for better results for agriculture and better results for the fishery. And we feel, I think, a sense of accomplishment about having gotten that many projects done. Thanks.
Awesome. So here, everybody, are the contact information for those partners who we saw today. Thank you so much, Caleb, Will, Brian, and Josh for joining us. And we hope that everybody has a great rest of your Friday. If you have more questions about the Clark Fork Coalition or need to get in touch, some more information about the project, feel free to visit us at www.clarkfork.org. Have a great rest of your Friday, everybody. Thanks for joining.